it again.
There you go.
Okay, great. Yeah, so here we have that. So the cone here is as you make your future thought more coherent, it becomes concrete. And then we have here the proto duration. In the work, they analogous to when you are splitting a elementary particle. So Gary, if you want to kind of speak to what that means in physics, like when it stops being just a single linear path and
when you split like an atom, or when you like yeah, and then you I mean, in just basic terms, yeah, you're breaking it down, whatever, down to its most fundamental
I mean the
natural components.
What is its name? I mean when there's the localization of an elementary particle, and then when it is going on a straight path, I forget what you call it, but then it becomes a wave. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, a wave, yeah. So yes,
Like photons and whatnot, right?
What is it called when you? Is it just called splitting?
no, I mean, I don't think you mean like wave mechanics, but it's when you're getting down to like quantum, or almost, and the probability of the quantum mechanics, and where
Like the observation principle and whatnot.
yes, and the potential for, yeah, that's when you get down to that tiny potential, it becomes muddied, and it's the smaller you get, the harder it is to have specificity and precision, and then it becomes like a wave, basically. I think that's what you're trying to get at. So but I think that's what you're trying to get at.
That is, yeah. And they equivocate the proto duration that's playing here. They equivocate the specificity of the imagined future to that, because it's not something you can really hack down. So, you know, as you're up here in the proto present and you're projecting to the future, to that specific point that slowly but surely gains coherence, and then you're here. Because it's so nebulous, it's more so experienced as a plane of possible points of what that future looks like. So I might remember that when I first thought about the car I wanted, I might have seen a blue sedan. But then the next time I think about it, it actually looks like a blue Prius. And I don't even remember, because that's the nature of projecting into the future, right? It's not something factual. I can't go back and check, was it a blue sedan? Was it a blue Prius? I can write it down. I can be like, well, I had this idea. It's going to be, but I can't go back and check. I can't just look out the window and say, oh, there's the future. It's a blue Prius, right? I have to think about it, and there's no way to fact check what I imagined it to be in the future.
So hold that thought. Like, how? Okay, sorry. I'll write this down because I got a question about that. How we relate that type of thinking.
Holding the thought. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Right. That's the point. So, and
that's the point.
That's actually very funny.
I think you're getting it very intuitively, which is very synchronous, and that's good. Yeah, that's fantastic.
But yes, I think we're all. Thank you for all of us. But how do we apply that to non-humans? So, like a tree, you know. And then we start getting into the metaphysics, or like our human imagination of what a tree, quote unquote, thinks, or what a tree, quote unquote, wants. So, and does a tree have a focal point and a hold that thought mentality? And then it's like, well, what is thought? And so if we're trying to come up with some universal rule of the world, or how do we account for, how do we remove the human aspect, human perspective, to apply it to, a lack of other term, the natural world, the physical, non-human world.
Yeah, like we can definitely do that. Let's actually go to the first link on oncology visuals. Now I'll click it so you can see it too. But this is what I'm thinking. So here's our tree, and right here where it says the phloem, I think that's how you say it. The phloem is where the point of growth is on a tree, and then there are there's two ways that it grows at the same time. So you see how it says growth. Oops. You see how it says growth and it shows both directions. Do you see where my mouse is pointing?
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's actually growing this way. This way is going straight up to the leaves and to the branches, and it's also going this way, which this other part, is that xylem, is going down to the roots. And so all throughout its life, it is growing in two ways, but also one way. So it never moves back in. Once it's there, it's there. But it is still growing in two ways at the same time. So that's very different than how we experience things, right? Like we pretty much just take ourselves and project into the future. But a tree is going to the roots and it's going to the branches at the same time. Now it's still, even with all that happening, there's still at the center that it's called the heartwood, and that's the dead wood that no longer serves a purpose, but it's still part of the tree. So if I were to look at this and kind of use what Eric said is where things are changing, that's probably where the subjectivity is. I would say probably the self of the tree is right there in the cambium. It's going to be right there in the vascular cambium where all the growth is happening. And so this is probably where the tree has the experience of hold that thought because it's the tension of the roots and the branches. So I have no way of proving this, right? I have only the facts I have, but using that possible world logic, I can probably juxtapose this being has an experience of time, and the experience of time where time is most at the point of contention, where there's the most like energetic investment in time's difference. It's probably here, right there, in the cambium.
So we assume that the tree just wants to grow, period. A tree wants to grow, base assumption. And if one year it's struck with a drought, or one year gets a lot of light from one direction because it's being blocked out, shaded out from other trees from another direction. So it has the thought of, I just want to grow, but because of the environmental factors, the variables that are affecting its growth, it adjusts how it reaches its goal of growth. Like it will grow a certain way, or it will not grow because it's lack of water. And then that is held. I'm just trying to follow along with you, and maybe so that's why I'm speaking this out loud. And that growth or not growth for that ring of year is its memory. I mean, is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, I think when if somehow that vascular cambium became aware of and referenced itself to the heartwood, that would be like it thinking about its memories, right? But this doesn't look like a brain at all, right? It doesn't look anything like how we experience the world. But all the okay.
Then we get into like the book, the language of trees. I think that's what it's called, and how the trees and plants talk to each other by releasing chemicals underground or through the root systems.
Talk, but you don't see where the self is, right?
Can you go back to, so you're kind of trying to contrast this experience of the tree to how like we ourselves experience growth or time. So it seemed like you're trying to say like we normally just think about growth in one direction towards the future, whereas a tree might have like multiple directions. Is that, am I
Yeah, yeah. So I'm saying this tree has probably two types of time. Um,
okay?
well, if we could understand and posit what that means, maybe we can understand, other subjectivities that are very different than us that we might encounter, but because we didn't know what we were dealing with, we missed them, right? So maybe I'm kind of thinking if we practice with this, we might miss less subjectivities in the world, right? So I think I don't know because you could kind of equivocate the xylem, I think that's how you say it. You could say that is the remembrance of the past, and then you could say, oh, maybe the phloem is the experience we have of thinking into the future. So maybe it's not all that different, right? But the idea is to just know where it probably is that first, like where it probably is experiencing time, and to probably identify that as consciousness. Um, so that maybe you can extrapolate that practice across all encounters. Whether or not that's possible, I don't know, but it all comes down to a lot of it is that ego, is that sense of consciousness, right? And like, if this is a ring right here, right? This is a ring. It is not a point. It is not like a localized brain area. It's a ring. So does a tree have an ego in the same way? It might have an experience of time, but it's not like a concrete sense because it's clearly in a ring. So how would something have a wide scoping sense of self that is surrounding its whole self? And how do we ever understand that? Because that's so different than how we are.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of thoughts going on here, hard to wrap my head around, but like if I'm a tree, I can imagine part of me is growing on the vertical axis, and a part of me is growing along in the tree ring outwards. And so you're saying those are like kind of two different senses of time. Um, I think it kind of makes a little bit of sense.
About that thought too, Isaac, about using the axis, the XY axis, but then I went to, well, they're just progressing forward. Like they're just still growing. So they're still going through time. I mean, it gets to the point, at least in my mind, like, well, what is back in time? Like a tree doesn't like reverse grow, which would be in my mind back in time. So even though it grows on two different axes, that doesn't, perhaps it doesn't mean that, that's going through two different times. It's still going forward. It's still growing out, or, down or out. Down or out's relative, but it's still, the tree's getting bigger. The roots are getting bigger. The tree is getting taller. It's not reversing itself. And
Yeah,
this one, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I'm kind of curious to bring it back to more of like the human experience. Like, is it true that humans only experience time in one way? Like, I feel like I have multiple dimensions. I might be growing towards a career goal, but I'm also like growing in some wider sense. So, and in that way, like, I don't know if time is even so straightforward for like myself or any other human, but I don't know if anyone wants to weigh in there, but yeah. Like,
Are you asking what is time?
I mean, so does everyone else here like experience time in such a like linear way, I guess?
I'm curious, how else do you experience? I'm very curious.
Well,
Like, I think I experience in one way, but maybe if I hear your definition, I might agree with you.
What's the thought? Like I keep like forever. For me, I've always had the thought of, well, time doesn't exist. Like, what is time? Well, just time doesn't exist. And then because it's like when, you think about, well, what is time? Well, that's the observation of change.
Right.
So,
Mhm.
but then it gets to the thought process of, well, what define change? Okay, I'm taller now. I have gray hair now. I die now. That's a change. Then I guess therefore, what do we call that? What the moon and the sun rotate around the earth, and or the earth rotates around the sun, and it's like where does the human concept of time come from? It comes from our observations of out in space and the seasonal change and the birth and death of ourselves and our animals and of animals and plants, and to put a concept to that change, that activity, that constant activity. Well, okay, well, that's time. And then as our science evolves, then we get to measure time in more precise ways. Like, okay, now we have a watch that can track. I mean, you guys know this. The watch or the sundial that tracks time of day. So I don't. I don't know, other than it would be an interesting conversation to say, well, what if time just doesn't exist? Like all these activities and changes are happening, but what is the change? What is it actually?
If there was no time, we'd experience everything all at once. There would not be
Interesting
any
thought.
delineation between what's going on now and what will happen.
Or nothing at all. That's an interesting thought. So is that a part of the probability? So time is an ingredient of, I mean, you could potentially experience everything everywhere all at once.
Is it a movie or something? But
Yeah, I think I watched that.
There is a movie of that title, yeah.
But what if
but you can go ahead. I was gonna say, like, this whole idea about like experiencing everything all together at once, is that really possible? Because I feel like experiencing implies temporality. So if I want to experience like falling in love, falling out of love, that implies a sequence of events. So can I really experience it at the same time? Like, to me, but anyways, that might be a different.
That is a good point. Yeah, because I think I think I read somewhere that somatic memory is like very hard for humans to have, insofar as remembering truly how it felt to be in one stage when you're in a whole different stage. Like it's next to impossible. Like I could say to Garrett, I'm like, think about the time you were 3 years old and you dropped your ice cream. Like you can imagine it, but do you feel the way that felt? No, it's gone, right? So is that possible to feel all those things at once? I don't know. I think when I look at this tree, I think because it is a ring shape and it's all around the tree in all directions, I think if anything were to have a sort of experience that was like kind of like all things at once, it would be something like that. Because when you look at an MRI, like an MRI of the brain, you can pretty much tell which part of the brain is getting stimulated, and it's all the other parts are working for sure, but there's definitely a concrete area where there's like a cloud of activity. That's very different from this, where it's evenly distributed all the time, because if it wasn't, it would not result in a uniform tree. It would look like a bunch of knobs or something like that. So I feel like if something does have that experience, it is possible, but it probably is a lot weirder than we think, and maybe this guy is going through that.
Is there any like analogy in the human experience you think where we could approach that kind of more uniform experience of time, or is that like kind of not accessible.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think experience in relation to time is very interesting because we don't really ever experience the present or the future, because that's when we're experiencing anything, it's already happened. We're analyzing the things that has already happened and how we feel about them, or how we feel about them as they had happened. So our experiences are all based on the past.
Right.
Or like anticipation of the future, or
Mhm.
yeah, okay.
Because when I look at this, when I think about the subjectivity, I'm like, oh, let's start at the core of it, and then like pretend like it's going out to here and it's going out to there from the core of it. And I feel like that is me taking my human experience and implanting it on this other way of existing, which is so hard to imagine another way of existing where it's not from the center out, it's from all around. I mean, it's just so my idea is maybe using metaphysics and possible worlds and analyzing very carefully, we can determine whether or not we can even basically understand what that would be like.
Do
And if
other
we can, we can.
do other people generally agree that there can be like different experiences of time that like we might think about it, and I don't know, different.
Yeah, when I'm watching the toast, like not toast, or watching a pot boil, God, it feels so slow. Or I'm having a fun time reading a book or playing a game, and gosh, time goes so fast. I mean, is that like experiential time? But the time's still time, but it just feels differently.
That is simply just like our perception of time, because that is
Perception of.
all simply perception. Time didn't change. What it changed was your perception and how you viewed it. Reality and the way you see it changed, but actual reality didn't.
Now that's interesting because if you go into the worksheet I gave you, there's a philosopher, Ellie something. She says there's no such thing as objective time. There's only two kinds of time: natural time and psychological time. So natural time is like the cumulative time of your environment, and then there is your psychological time, which is the rate of decay of your body, and put that in context to your ability to detect difference and your total energy, and then you put that in ratio to the change your total environment time, and that's the only between those differences. That's the only quote unquote objective time, but it's not objective time because if I sped everything up, I gave it more or less entropy, we would totally forget what it was like to be at this level of time. And they're kind of showing that in the tree ring, is they're saying because there's more carbon for the tree, sometimes it will grow really, really, really fast, and probably experiences more time, like faster or more time, whatever fits the bill, in those periods of higher CO2. And what does that say about whether or not there is objective time? If it's really only natural time in relationship to psychological time, which is like the rate our body decays, is there such a thing as subjective time?
Well, I think what Gary, was it? I mean,
Garrett, yeah.
Gary, from your physics background, you're saying it. So there's a speed of light, that's a constant. So you'd argue there is objective time with regards to that. It sounds like what Alexandra is saying is that it's more so subjective time, like as you experience it. I mean, we're getting at the subjective versus objective experiences of time, I guess. So that's what I'm kind of picking up from this. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, you could say natural time, the rate at which the largest possible perceivable external environment changes. You could say that is objective time. But does that mean that you were really actually conceiving of all possible times, or just what your cognitive apparatus can actually handle, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a good question, and it seems like humans, animals, humans have evolved to the brain seemingly has evolved to be able to focus on what it needs to focus on, even though it's constantly bombarded with stimuli and activities of time. We only, I only pay attention to certain things, and how I perceive those things that I pay attention to, that is how I feel the passage of time. Now, that's like from a human, that's the words I'm using. That's how I feel. I feel the passage of time. That doesn't mean that that's actually how time passes. And even though maybe the degradation of my ability to perceive stimuli because of my brain deteriorating as I get older, or whatever, the time still is, Einstein would say, is a constant, like the only constant change. Light is the only constant, and the speed of light is the only constant. But again, the speed of light is, we're measuring the time of something, and that doesn't change. But how we perceive it, or how the tree perceives it, it could be flexible, but that doesn't mean that the time apparatus that it lives in is flexible as well. It's like, it's functioning within an inflexible constraint time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're a tree and like you need light and photons are hitting you from the sun or whatever, then there's a framework outside of that you can't escape. But the tree itself can still have its own, I guess, subjectivity. So, yeah.
It's probably a lot less complex than what we experience, just because it just doesn't have enough complexity to handle a lot of information.
It's just like a machine, like, plants, and maybe just to make they're just machines, perhaps, they just do a function.
I would say that if there ever is like a more organic machine, I would say like a tree is probably more like that, because it has to be uniform. There's no room for abnormality. There's no room for freedom. Freedom is abnormality. That is a lot of what it is. So it would have to cease to be a tree. So yeah, I would agree that there's a sort of mechanical element to a tree that is a lot different than humans. Now, I'm sure there's some super intelligence that looks at a human and they're like, wow, that is like a machine because it's so simple. But, while we don't have an understanding of that, we can say, oh, yes, I am much more complex than this tree.
I would say hold that thought, May, for discussion again, because perhaps if we can define a human as a machine, if we can define all living things, plants, animals, perhaps rocks, as a type of living machine, and we are able to get rid of our emotion, or if we don't overthink things, if we just simply look at the function of human, the function of life, function of tree, and we are able to distill that down to the bare necessities of life, of what it means to live within a fixed construct of time, then maybe we are on the path to defining a universal language of what you're trying to get at. Perhaps. And when I say hold that thought, because I'm not convinced that we're not just, what is it that we cannot be defined as living as machines as well. And I think that's just I'd love to learn. I'd love to learn other people's thoughts on that. Birds, a worm. We all do things. We all need to eat, right? We all need to drink. We all need to do our business. But when we start thinking about things and being emotionally driven to do things, or feel emotional pain to not do things, or however we define that, we're still from my perspective, at a base fundamental level, functioning as a machine under a certain set of rules that we just can't get around, because then we just would stop functioning. I'm not going to eat. Okay, that's fine. But
Not really.
well, that's the
Yeah.
point. You can't run away from the machine of life.
Yeah, I guess my question is it possible using this exercise we're doing to suddenly have an understanding of something way bigger, like to communicate with something that is way bigger? Because like think of a stem cell. Like stem cells are probably like the geniuses of your body. They're able to do everything and they do a great job and they heal things and it's fantastic. Do they have an effect on our consciousness? Do like the little things that stem cells are doing, do they actually accumulate up and we kind of feel odd when they're doing a certain thing or have a certain thought when they're doing a certain thing? Do you think they actually do? And like, is there a situation where we are that stem cell and suddenly we can have a real connection to this wider organism, this wider body, right? To me, that sounds fascinating because that is dimensionating, right? That's the fun stuff when you just suddenly open up an entirely huge but coherent dimension and actually start communicating with it. That is the cool stuff. So, you know, it takes a lot of opening your mind and kind of advanced thought experiments. But I think using the metaphysical tools, even though they seem like they just don't mean anything, I think using those tools and applying them to like subjectivities, it's possible to probably get kind of close to that.
I agree, and I apologize. We got 2 minutes left on this. Do you want to keep going? Someone want to start a new meeting, or are we going to table some of this for next round? Because
Yeah,
what you hit on, Alexandria, I mean, that's, yeah, we're starting to
I think it'd be good to have like a 10-minute wrap up, 15-minute wrap up, so we're not just like crunching thing ever at like to 2 minutes. But
are you able to host, or Eric, are you able to host for an hour to do 10 minutes of wrap up?
Yeah, go ahead. I don't know if I can, but yeah.
No, I'll just host it again. Let me just make it real quickly. Hopefully it happens before the end. I just set 9. Oh no, it has to be. I think you'll still be able to click on it. So let's save that.
Did you put something in chat, or?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, sorry.
Because it's gonna start later. It's gonna start right then. So where's the chat? Okay, somebody put something in the chat. So okay, here it is. Have it quick.
Okay, I see it. Cool.
Thank you.
We'll just jump there, I guess.
Yeah, because this is going to close in like 30 seconds.
Okay, great.